This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Carlos de la Torre, welcome back to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward. We are talking about how the coffee industry in Mexico has been influenced and affected by the pandemic. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about how now, a couple of years into the pandemic, how the employees of the coffee industry, the baristas and the roasters and the salespeople and all those kinds of people have been where they're at 2 years in and how they're experiencing things. What's been your experience?
I'm glad you asked about my experience, because talking about something that in fact coffee is still so big, it's going to be a huge responsibility. But I'm going to talk about from the perspective and conversations I've held with different professionals. As I told you in the last episode, I've never been like a formal employee at a coffee shop. Not because I wasn't, I didn't want, but I started my coffee shop when I was at college, so never had the opportunity. That's why I'm always very curious about what employees think and in their situations and understanding of the coffee industry. I'm gonna start maybe with the consequences of the pandemic with the employees. I guess the main one was the courage to speak up.
Wow.
Because there was a lot of things happening wrong during the first stage of the pandemic and even before. And as I told you about some related issues in the last episode, the pandemic was something so big that nothing can be worse than that. So at that point, some of the attitudes or maybe abuses or not legal stuff which happened at companies was revealed by the employees, because they have nothing to lose. They already at home making quarantine with no job, so they felt the courage, and that was in some way great.
It was exciting to watch, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, and the best part is they make to the business owners to take a moment to think before acting, before saying anything, before even putting a number in the wage of an employee. You know, it was like that moment when you as a business owner, maybe I realized that before, but some business owners realize that they have no business if they have no people. No.
I find it fascinating, even till today, that it took a fucking pandemic for people to figure that out.
You know, Hegel and Marx told it like 100 years ago, and we never figured it out.
And this goes back to that whole conspiring to each other's success kind of thing that I was saying in the last episode.
Yes, exactly.
You know, if you're not conspiring to the success of your employees, what are you doing?
Yeah, you're conspiring against your success. Yeah.
Exactly. That's why it's our tagline, conspiring to each other's success, because I feel as though we're missing the point as an industry. We got to come together a little bit more if we want to achieve the kind of success that we're pretending to have. There's such a disconnect between the profitability of a business and what people pretend is the profitability of their business. And the pandemic exposed that to a lot of people, especially employees. Employees came out and said, well, you can run off and close your business and do all these kinds of things. And you used to say that you gave a shit about us as employees. Yeah. Where are you? Where are you? Now that I have to look after myself. But I've got to be fair. There were some employers all across the world that said, I'm going to make sure that all my staff have groceries. I'm going to make sure that they at least have access to housing. I'm going to talk to employees, landlords on their behalf. So it was great to see on that side of things. But what I noticed was the most empowering thing, as you were saying, is that employees for the first time had nothing to lose, really. And so they felt empowered enough to get on social media and say,
yeah,
hey, listen, my boss hasn't paid me at all. Or my boss is expecting me to come in and work for no money in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have heard about that a lot. I've heard a story from a barista who was working at a coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that was a normal practice before pandemic. But during the pandemic, I cannot realize a coffee shop hiring a barista and not paying for 2 months because he was in proof. I was like, really? During a pandemic, you're making that? It's not fair.
So he was like on a trial for 2 months?
Yeah.
Like an intern in a coffee shop?
Yes, I guess it was 13 hours daily.
This is exploitation. There's no other way to look at it. Wow. And going back to what you were saying, this is the great thing, is that people are feeling empowered as employees because we're all having a shared experience. This pandemic has exposed everything. Well, it's exposing a lot and will continue to expose a lot. But the shared experience is that we all have a voice now. We always had that voice, but now we're choosing to use it. Because, as you said, we've got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So where do you think, how do you think things have progressed for employees from the time that they started vocalizing things at the beginning of the pandemic till now? Where do you think it's at for them?
I really think, and I hope that most of them have had negotiations about salaries and also about weekly hours, and not most of them. This December, not just for me, but for most of the business, was like a pretty good month.
Great.
And we have close sales to the month before pandemic. And I don't think that the employees have been restored to that moment. At least not in some things like, the obviously exploitation, but they are now at a different point in which they value more their time. I've heard this from a cook who works for us at the coffee shop with my wife, and she says, "I really like this place because uh, you're thinking about me having time for me, because during the pandemic, we before we used to work our ass off all week. Then we settle down, appreciate being at home, being with family, resting, reading, and that kind of slow motion things. And then we get back to the job, and the most of the business, we're like, okay, it's gonna work again super hard. And I think, at least in coffee industry, a lot of baristas are like stepping aside and saying, I'm not working that hard.
It's not worth it for me to work that hard anymore.
Yeah.
Right. For chefs, this is why so many of them ended up with coke habits and as alcoholics, because they work for minimum wage. They work 16 hours a day. Their relief is when they then go out afterwards and get drunk and fucked up, and then they have to be at work really early the next morning. It's a vicious cycle.
Yes.
The pandemic gave everyone reason to pause. And a lot of the people in the hospitality industry really reassessed. This isn't a life. It's a life, but it's dysfunctional. And if we're going to live in a world where a pandemic has made everybody stop, this isn't worth it for me. I don't see the long-term win, because now I know that this business that I hoped I would open one day, now I know it actually doesn't make any money.
Yes, and some of them actually started business or another job during the pandemic. Since coffee has uncertainty, they want to keep the other job. I was in the past, I used to be very jealous about the projects of the baristas. I was like, if you are gonna work with me, you can have a side project, because I need you to focus on my company. Uh-huh. And now I'm almost asking them to make something. I have this joke with one guy from the coffee shop, because I sell my cold brew at my wife's coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
And
no look for anyone who wants to look it up.
No, it changed the name. It's Blanco. Yeah, it's Blanco Camellia. Blanco. Yeah. And I went the last week, and I saw the bottles of what? I saw the bottles of this guy in the coffee shop, and I was like, hey, you're kicking me out of my own coffee shop?
and he's like, yep, that's business.
Yeah. And then he came to I came to the other coffee shop, to Avellaneda, and he opened the fridge, and more bottles? What's happening here? And so we made that joke that he's gonna kick me out of all of my coffee shops. But I'm very happy that he's selling cold brew in that scale, because it was very hard for him during the pandemic. I remember he buy coffee to us to make the cold brew. So we try to help sometimes with the coffee or with the discount. And now, knowing that if I open a new coffee shop, it's also a new spot for him to showcase his coffee. It's great.
Yeah, awesome. We're going to wrap it up there, and we'll be back in the next episode to talk more. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everyone. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.